She walked into the courtroom in a plain navy suit, no jewelry, no entourage, not a single relative by her side. The man she had married sat 10 steps away, surrounded by 5 lawyers and the smile of a winner before the match even began. The media called her the failed wife. He called her the most costly mistake of his life. But today, right here in this courtroom, another man would walk in, and when he placed his hand on her shoulder and called her his wife, the whole of New York City would hold its breath. This is the story of Selene Ashford, a woman abandoned by the world until she decided to rebuild it all from the ashes. Please like and comment with the city you're viewing so I know how far my story has progressed. And stay tuned to the end because the worst is yet to come, and the best is yet to come. The elevator doors opened on the 14th floor of the Manhattan Civil Courthouse, and Selene Ashford walked out without looking at anyone. That was the first thing her attorney, Marcus Webb, noticed, not the press crowding the hallway, not the 3 camera crews jostling for position near the double doors at the end of the corridor, not even the cluster of Grayson Vale's people stationed outside Courtroom 14 like sentinels at a gate they already owned. What Marcus noticed was that Selene did not look at any of it. She walked with her eyes fixed somewhere past the crowd, past the marble walls, past whatever was directly in front of her, as if she were navigating by a map only she could read. She was 34 years old and looked it. Not in a bad way. In the way of someone who had been through something real and hadn't tried to hide the evidence. There were shadows under her eyes she hadn't bothered to conceal with much. Her dark hair was pulled back, not elegantly, just pulled back. The navy suit fit her well enough, but it was 3 years old and Marcus knew it because he remembered the last time she'd worn it, to a different kind of meeting in a different kind of building when things had been less terrible. "They're already inside," Marcus said, falling into step beside her. He was a compact man in his early 50s, graying at the temples, with the permanently tired expression of a lawyer who had stopped believing in easy outcomes around the same time he'd stopped believing in easy anything. "Grayson came in 40 minutes early. He brought 4 attorneys. I counted." "I know. The press has been here since 7. "I know that too." "Selene." He caught her arm lightly and she stopped. The hallway noise swirled around them. Cameras, low conversations, someone's phone ringing with a ringtone that sounded like a pop song from 3 years ago. "I need you to understand what today is going to look like. He's going to perform. He does it every time there's an audience, and today there's a significant audience. He will say things designed to make you react. If you react, those cameras are going to—" "Marcus," she looked at him then, directly, and he stopped talking. Her eyes were dark brown, very steady, and gave very little away. "I'm not going to react." He studied her for a moment. "Okay. Tell me what we need from today." He exhaled. "We need to get the asset division formalized before he can execute the transfer of the Caldwell Holdings shares. His team filed a motion to delay the finalization, which the judge will hear first. If that delay gets granted, we lose another 60 days, and during those 60 days, the shares lose protected status, and he can liquidate them before they're classified as marital property." "Correct. So we need the judge to deny the motion." "We need the judge to deny the motion." She nodded once, like he'd confirmed something she already knew, and started walking again. Marcus kept pace. He had been representing women in contentious divorces for over 2 decades, and he had developed, over those 2 decades, a fairly reliable sense for who was going to be okay and who was not. The ones who were going to be okay usually had a particular quality he'd never found a clean word for, something that sat right behind the eyes, some internal steadiness that didn't depend on the outcome of any given day. He thought Selene Ashford had it. He also thought she was running on almost nothing and had been for a long time, and that the steadiness was costing her more than she was willing to say. He didn't say any of this. He pushed open the courtroom door and held it for her, and she walked through. The room was already full. Courtroom 14 was not a small space, but it felt reduced today, compressed by the number of bodies inside it. The press gallery occupied every available seat along the left wall. Several reporters had their phones out, held low against their legs in the practiced way of people who were going to record this, regardless of what the bailiff said. Near the back, 3 sketch artists had their pads open. It had that particular charged quality of a room that knew it was about to be part of a story. A slight collective tension, people sitting straighter than they needed to, conversations a half octave too loud. Grayson Vale was at the plaintiff's table, which was to say, the table positioned somehow slightly more advantageously toward the judge's bench. This was probably coincidence. With Grayson Vale, nothing was entirely coincidence. He was 41 years old, 6'1", and maintained the particular kind of physical presence that came from having enough money to pay people to ensure he always looked like the most put-together person in any given room. His dark hair was barbered into careful precision. His suit was charcoal and clearly custom, and probably cost more than most of the reporters covering this story made in a month. He was talking to one of his attorneys, a woman named Diane Foss, whom Marcus had described to Selene as technically brilliant and morally flexible, with the relaxed energy of someone who had already done the math and liked the result. He looked up when Selene entered. The smile he gave her was small and private, and it contained everything. The 3 years of marriage, the last 8 months of this process, every humiliating detail leaked to every gossip column and financial page, every late-night phone call from his attorneys to hers, designed purely to exhaust and erode. The smile said, "I know exactly how this ends." Selene looked at him for exactly 1 second. Then she sat down at her table and opened a folder. Marcus sat beside her. "Don't engage," he said under his breath. "I'm not engaging," she said. She was looking at a document in the folder that she had already read 17 times, but looking at it gave her somewhere to put her eyes that wasn't Grayson. The bailiff called the room to order, and Judge Patricia Harrow took the bench. She was a woman in her early 60s with reading glasses on a chain and the expression of someone who had presided over too many of these hearings to be impressed by any of the participants. She reviewed something on the papers in front of her, set them down, looked at both tables. "We're here today to address the motion filed by Mr. Vale's counsel requesting a 60-day continuance on the finalization of asset division, and then, if time permits, preliminary testimony regarding the contested properties." She looked at Diane Foss. "Counselor, you have 5 minutes." Diane Foss stood. She was efficient, precise, and she made the argument for the delay sound like pure procedural necessity. Additional documentation required, new financial assessments pending, the complexity of certain offshore holdings. It was good. Marcus had told Selene it would be good. Marcus made his counter-argument, which was also good. Selene kept her eyes on the table. Then Judge Harrow said, "Mr. Vale, do you wish to address the court?" And that was when things went sideways. Grayson stood up the way he always did, like he'd been waiting for exactly this moment and had prepared for it specifically. He buttoned his jacket. He looked at the judge. Then, almost as an aside, he glanced toward Selene's table and said, in the conversational tone of someone pointing out a minor inconvenience, "Your Honor, I'd simply like the court to understand that we're asking for additional time because the financial documentation my ex-wife has provided is, frankly, incomplete, which is consistent with her general approach to financial matters throughout our marriage." The press gallery shifted. Selene heard it, that collective small movement, the particular silence of people paying attention. "Mr. Vale," Judge Harrow said, her voice flat, I'm not being inflammatory, Your Honor. I'm being accurate. My attorneys can provide documentation showing that Ms. Ashford was involved in 0 substantive financial decisions during our marriage. She had access to accounts, yes. She spent from those accounts, yes. Whether she understood what she was spending is a separate question. He paused. The concern is that she may not have the financial sophistication to accurately represent these assets, which is why additional time is necessary. The room was very quiet in a way that was not quiet at all. It was the loudness of a lot of people holding their breath at the same time. Selene's hand, under the table, had closed into a fist. She could feel the specific tension in her jaw that came from keeping her face neutral when her body wanted to do something else. Marcus put one hand on the table near hers, not touching, just there. "Mr. Vale." Judge Harrow's voice had gotten very even, which Selene had learned meant she was controlling something. "You may address procedural matters. You may not characterize your wife, ex-wife, your estranged spouse in ways that are not relevant to the motion before me. Sit down." Grayson sat, but he glanced at the press gallery when he did it, And the glance said, "I got what I needed." He had. Selene knew it. Several of those reporters were already typing. Marcus leaned close. "Stay steady." She was steady. That was almost the worst part. The terrible discipline of staying steady. The amount of effort it required that no one in this room could see. And how being steady looked. From the outside, like she didn't care. Like she had no response to offer because she had nothing to respond with. Grayson understood this dynamic, had probably counted on it. The judge ruled on the motion. A partial concession, 20 days, not 60. A compromise that satisfied no one and disadvantaged Selene's timeline in ways that would require Marcus to do significant maneuvering. The ruling was delivered in the measured language of the bench, and Selene absorbed it and didn't allow her expression to change. Then Grayson stood up again, this time without being invited. "Your Honor, I'd also like to raise—" "Mr. Vale, you will wait until The matter of the foundation accounts. My ex-wife has been funneling assets into a charitable foundation in ways that I believe constitute fraudulent transfer of marital property, and I want the record to reflect—" Judge Harrow's gavel came down. "Mr. Vale, sit down. I'm simply trying to protect the court's time by surfacing. One more interruption and I will hold you in contempt. I mean that." Grayson sat, but he had done the thing he wanted to do. The word fraudulent was now in the air of the room and in the audio of however many people were recording this, and by tonight it would be in approximately 47 news items. Selene knew this as surely as she knew her own name. She looked at the legal pad in front of her. She had written nothing on it. She wrote a single word now, small and controlled. Later. It was the word she used to mean, there will be a time for all of this. Not today. Later. The hearing limped forward for another 40 minutes. Testimony was tabled. Documents were entered. Arguments were made and countered. Judge Harrow maintained order with the practiced authority of someone who had long since stopped being surprised by the behavior of wealthy men in divorce proceedings. Grayson made two more sideways comments, both technically within bounds, both designed to reduce Selene to a category: the incompetent wife, the financially naive spouse, the woman who had been carried by a man's ambition and was now confusedly trying to claim credit for work she hadn't done. Selene said almost nothing. When she did speak, it was to answer direct questions from the judge, and she answered them cleanly and completely, and Marcus noticed again that thing behind her eyes. The hearing was winding down. Judge Harrow was reviewing a calendar. Grayson was saying something low to Diane Foss that made Diane write something on her legal pad. The press gallery had settled into the particular quiet of people who had gotten most of what they came for and were now waiting for the official end so they could leave and file. Then the doors at the back of the courtroom opened. Selene didn't look up immediately. Doors opened during hearings. It happened, but the room changed. It was subtle at first. A shift in the background noise, the particular silence spreading from the back like something moving through water. A few people turned, then more. Judge Harrow looked up from her calendar. The bailiff took a half step toward the aisle and then stopped. Selene turned. There were four of them. 3 men in dark clothing who arranged themselves with the precise efficiency of people who had done this many times in many rooms, and then the 4th man who walked through the space they created the way water moves through open ground. Not fast, not slow. As if the question of pace had never occurred to him because it had never been relevant. He was tall, not in the artificial way of someone who'd cultivated physical presence, but in the way of a man who had simply always taken up exactly this much space. The coat he wore was charcoal, cut close, and he moved in it like it weighed nothing. His face was angular, the kind of face that looked like it had been made with economy in mind. Nothing wasted, nothing decorative. Dark eyes. A jaw that had some tension in it. Maybe 40, maybe 42. She had seen photographs. The photographs had not been adequate. The whispers reached her before he did. Nico Varela. The name moved through the press gallery like current through a wire. Selene heard it in fragments. A reporter she could see in her peripheral vision had dropped his pen, actually dropped it, and was staring. Diane Foss had gone very still in a way that was not natural stillness. Grayson Vale had turned in his chair, and for the first time in 3 years of proceedings, Selene watched something cross his face that was not confidence. Nico Varela walked down the center aisle of Courtroom 14 without looking at anyone on his left or his right. He walked to Selene's table. He stopped behind her. He put one hand on her shoulder. Not possessive, not dramatic, just placed, the weight of it warm and certain through the fabric of her suit. And he said, in a voice that was quiet enough that you had to be close to hear it, but somehow carried to every corner of the room, "Sorry I'm late, sweetheart." Not a single camera clicked. Every person in the press gallery who had been photographing everything since the moment the doors opened had somehow stopped. The air in the room had the quality of the moment before a large thing falls. Grayson Vale said, with a laugh that didn't quite land, "What is this?" Nico looked at him then. Just looked. It was not a threatening look. It did not need to be. "Your Honor." Nico's attorney, a woman who had entered behind him and whom Selene had also seen photographs of, Petra Kwan, internationally recognized in 3 different areas of law, stepped forward with a folder. "I apologize for the interruption. My client has relevant documentation to present to the court." Judge Harrow, who to her enormous credit had not visibly lost her composure, said, "This is highly irregular, Counselor." "It is, Your Honor. We ask the court's indulgence for approximately 3 minutes. A pause. Judge Harrow looked at the folder. She looked at Nico. She had certainly heard the name. Everyone in any position of institutional authority in this city had heard the name, and her expression gave nothing away about what she thought of it. "Proceed." Petra Kwan placed the folder on the bench. "My client is Nico Varela, and he is the legal spouse of Selene Ashford Varela, having married her in a private civil ceremony 8 months ago. The documentation before you includes the certified marriage license, a notarized prenuptial agreement, and registered financial disclosures filed with the appropriate authorities." She paused. "This information is materially relevant to the asset division currently under consideration, as Ms. Ashford's marital status and the financial agreements pertaining to it affect the classification of several properties currently in dispute." The silence in the room was total. Then Grayson Vale stood up so fast his chair scraped back against the floor. She can't, that's not—" He looked at Selene. "You've been married for 8 months? While our divorce was—" "The divorce was not finalized," Marcus said, standing, keeping his voice level. "Ms. Ashford entered into this marriage legally and in compliance with applicable law, as the documentation confirms." "This is a setup," Grayson said. The composure was gone. It had gone fast, which told Selene something she had suspected. It had always been thin. The version of Grayson Vale that the world saw was constructed, maintained, calibrated. She planned this. She's been planning this entire proceeding. "Mr. Vale," Judge Harrow's voice had found a new register. "You will sit down or you will be removed." He sat. But his eyes were on Selene, and they were different eyes now. Not the calculating confidence of the man who had walked into this room 40 minutes ago, but something rawer and less managed and considerably more frightened. Selene looked back at him. She did not smile. She did not need to. Nico Varela sat down beside her at the table. Petra Kwan had materialized a chair from somewhere, or perhaps his people had brought one. Selene wasn't entirely certain, and his shoulder was 2 inches from hers, and she could feel, faintly, the warmth of him, and the room had not recovered its breath yet. She wasn't certain it was going to. Judge Harrow was reviewing the documents. Her reading glasses were on. Whatever she was reading, she read it twice. Then she set it down and looked at both tables. "We will recess for 30 minutes, she said, "at which point I will address the implications of this documentation on the current proceedings." She looked at Grayson's table with an expression that was professionally neutral and privately something else. "I would strongly recommend that all counsel use this time productively." The gavel came down. The room erupted. Cameras that had been sitting in stunned silence suddenly had a great deal to do. Reporters were on their phones before they'd finished standing. Selene could hear the noise rising like water, voices layering over voices. The particular excited urgency of a story that had just become a significantly larger story than anyone had anticipated. She sat very still in the center of it. Beside her, Nico was speaking quietly to Petra Kwan about something procedural. His voice was low and unhurried. He didn't look at the cameras. He didn't look at Grayson. He had the particular quality of a man in a room full of weather who was himself not weather. After a moment, without looking at her, he said quietly, just for her, "How are you doing?" It was such a specific and ordinary question in such an extraordinarily not ordinary moment that something in Selene's chest moved in a way she hadn't expected. "Standing," she said. He nodded, like that was the right answer. "Good enough." She looked across the room at Grayson, who was in an intense, low-voiced, extremely agitated conversation with Diane Foss. Two of his other attorneys had their phones out. One of them had gone pale in a distinctive way, the color leaving a face that understood, before the rest of the body caught up, that something had gone very badly wrong. Selene had spent 3 years watching Grayson Vale be the person who knew what was coming, the person who had planned for the contingency, the person who had already made his move before anyone else had finished processing the last one. She understood now, in the specific clarity of this particular moment, what it felt like to be the person on the other side of that. She understood it from the outside, watching it happen to him, and she filed the feeling away somewhere careful. The 30-minute recess had started. She did not know, yet, what the next 30 minutes were going to produce. She did not know what the judge was going to find in those documents, or what Grayson's attorneys were going to attempt, or what the morning's headlines were going to look like before sunset. What she knew, sitting in the center of a room that was still reverberating, shoulder 2 inches from a man whose name made institutional power go quiet, was that the particular performance that Grayson Vale had planned for today, the careful stage he had constructed over months in which she was the background and he was the story, was over. Something else was beginning. She wasn't certain yet exactly what it was. But across the room, Grayson Vale was afraid, and the last time Grayson Vale had been afraid, he had made a mistake. She was counting on that. The 30-minute recess lasted 22 minutes before Judge Harrow called them back in, and those 22 minutes were the loudest silence Selene Ashford had experienced in recent memory. Marcus had pulled her into a side conference room off the main corridor, a small, airless space with a laminate table and 2 chairs and a window that looked out onto a ventilation shaft, and he had closed the door and stood against it with his arms crossed and the expression of a man trying to decide which of several large problems to address first. "You could have told me," he said. "I know. Selene, I am your attorney. I have been your attorney for 14 months. There is a legal and professional argument to be made that what you just did, introducing this information on the day of a hearing without briefing your own counsel, I know, Marcus, constitutes a significant breach of, I know." She was standing at the window looking at the ventilation shaft. There was a pigeon on the ledge outside, gray and unbothered, doing whatever pigeons did. It had to be today. If we'd filed the marriage documentation in advance, Grayson's team would have found a way to use the notice period. They would have moved the shares, restructured the holding entities, done something. The element of surprise had legal value. "Petra Kwan explained that to you?" "Petra and I have been talking for 6 months. Marcus was quiet for a moment. 6 months. "Yes." "While you were also working with me?" "Yes." He exhaled through his nose, a long, controlled sound that contained a significant amount of what he wasn't saying. "I need to understand what I'm walking back into that courtroom with. What does the documentation actually establish?" Selene turned from the window. "The marriage is legal and registered. The prenuptial agreement is structured to protect both parties' pre-existing assets while jointly classifying certain new acquisitions." She paused. "Some of those acquisitions overlap with what Grayson is currently claiming as his sole property." Marcus stared at her. "How much overlap?" "Enough." "Selene, how much?" She held his gaze. "The Caldwell Holdings shares, the 3 tech patents he filed under Vale Innovations in the last 18 months, the secondary licensing agreements connected to those patents." She watched his face. "And the Meridian account." The color in Marcus's face did something complicated. "The Meridian account," he repeated. "Yes." Grayson has been arguing for 11 months that the Meridian account was seeded exclusively with premarital capital. He has. "And you're telling me that it's classifiable as I'm telling you that Petra has documentation establishing that 43% of the Meridian account's initial capitalization came from a source that is legally attributable to my interests, and that Grayson signed an agreement 4 years ago, during the marriage, Marcus, during the marriage, that he clearly never had anyone read carefully before he signed. The room was very quiet. The ventilation shaft outside the window made a low, continuous sound. "Who is Nico Varela?" Marcus said. Not really a question, more like a man placing a stone down on a table to see what sound it made. "My husband." Beyond the legal designation, she looked at him steadily. "He's a businessman." "He's—" Marcus stopped, started again. "His name generates a particular kind of reaction in rooms full of institutional power. I watched the bailiff take a half step back. I watched Diane Foss go white. I need to understand what I'm associated with." "You're associated with me," Selene said. "Same as before." "Selene, everything Nico does is legal, Marcus. Petraquan does not represent people whose activities cannot survive scrutiny. You know her reputation." He did. That was the thing. He knew Petraquan's reputation extremely well, and Petraquan's reputation was as close to bulletproof as reputations in that field got, which meant that whatever Nico Varela did, he did it in ways that left clean paper trails. What Nico Varela was rumored to do, the invisible architecture of influence that gossip and financial journalism and certain federal agency whisper networks attributed to him, that was a different category. And the fact that those two categories coexisted without contradiction was either reassuring or profoundly unsettling, and Marcus had not yet decided which. "Okay," he said, finally. "Okay. We go back in. Let me lead. You follow my cues. If Harrow asks you direct questions, I answer them directly." "Yes." He straightened, uncrossed his arms, put his lawyer face back on, which Selene had observed was not so much an expression as an absence of expression, a careful blankness that could read as confidence or patience or judgment, depending on what the observer needed to see. "Let's go." They went back into the corridor. Nico was outside the conference room with Petra and one of his people, a broad-shouldered man with close-cropped hair who stood at an angle that let him see 3 directions at once. Nico was reading something on his phone. He looked up when Selene came out. "Harrow's clerk sent a note," he said. "She's moving faster than expected. She wants to control the narrative of her courtroom before the afternoon news cycle," Petra said. She had the focused calm of a person who thought several moves ahead and had already done so. "Which works in our favor. She's going to address the documentation on the record before Grayson's team can file a motion to challenge authenticity." "Can they challenge it?" Marcus asked. Petra looked at him with professional courtesy. "They can try." They went back into the courtroom. The energy in the room had metabolized from the raw shock of 20 minutes ago into something more directed. The press gallery had the focused attention of people who understood they were watching something that was going to matter. Grayson was already at his table. He had recomposed himself partially. The suit was still perfect. The jaw was set, and the panic that had cracked through his face when the doors opened was now managed, contained, pressed down into something that presented as controlled anger. Diane Foss was beside him, and whatever she had told him in those 22 minutes, she had told it to him in a way that had given him something to hold on to. He sat straight, and he looked at Selene when she entered, and his eyes said, "I know what you did." Selene sat. Nico sat beside her. She was aware of him in a way she was still adjusting to. Not uncomfortable, not exactly comfortable either. A specific gravity, like sitting next to something that had weight and knew it. Judge Harrow entered, and the room stood and sat, and she got straight to it. "I've reviewed the documentation submitted by Mr. Varela's counsel," she said, "and I'm satisfied as to its authenticity pending any formal challenge, which you are of course entitled to file, Ms. Foss." She looked at Diane over her reading glasses. "With that framing, I'm going to ask some direct questions, and I expect direct answers. Mr. Vale?" She looked at Grayson. "Were you aware of your wife's marriage to Mr. Varela prior to this morning?" Grayson's jaw was tight. "No, Your Honor." "Were you aware of any relationship between your wife and Mr. Varela?" A pause, 1 beat too long. "No." Selene did not look at him. Ms. Ashford, Judge Harrow said, and Selene heard the subtle difference. Still Ashford, not Ashford Varela, not yet. The marriage occurred 8 months ago. Your divorce proceedings had been ongoing for approximately 6 months at that point. Were you advised by counsel, a glance at Marcus, regarding the legal implications of entering a new marriage while divorce proceedings were active? I was advised by Mr. Webb on the general question, Selene said. The specific structure, the prenuptial agreement, and the financial disclosures were handled by Ms. Kwan. And you understood at the time that this information would need to be disclosed to this court. I understood that it would be disclosed, yes. The timing was a strategic decision made in consultation with Ms. Kwan. The judge looked at her for a moment over the glasses. It was a look that said, I understand more than you've said and less than I'd like. I see. She made a note. Ms. Foss. Diane Foss stood. She had gotten herself together. Whatever the 22 minutes had given Grayson, they had given Diane something more useful. A line of attack. Your Honor, the defense would argue that the introduction of this documentation on the day of a scheduled hearing without advance notice to opposing counsel constitutes a deliberate procedural ambush that has materially prejudiced my client's ability to— It's not a criminal proceeding, Ms. Foss. Nevertheless, Your Honor, the surprise nature of— Note the objection. Continue. Diane continued. Her argument was crisp and structured, and it was also, Selene recognized, a delaying action, a way of establishing a record for an appeal, not a way of winning this moment. Which meant that Diane, who was technically brilliant, had done the math in the recess and reached a conclusion about what math could and couldn't solve. Then Grayson leaned forward and said quietly to Diane, something that Selene couldn't hear. Diane paused, turned to him. Slight head shake. Grayson said something else. Another head shake, more emphatic. Grayson sat back and then, before Diane could continue, said, clearly enough for the room, I want to speak. Diane closed her eyes for a half second. Mr. Vale, I want to address the court directly. He was already standing. Your Honor, I'd like to make a statement. Harrow looked at him over her glasses for a long moment. You understand that anything you say is on the record. I understand. Your counsel appears to advise against it. I understand that too. Another pause. Go ahead. Grayson turned slightly so that he was addressing not just the bench but the room, the press gallery, the cameras, the audience. He had always known how to find his audience, and he found it now by instinct, even standing in wreckage. This woman, he gestured towards Selene, a controlled gesture, not a pointed finger, has presented this court with what is being framed as a surprising legal development. I want to provide context. During our 3 years of marriage, Selene Ashford had no professional identity. She had no independent financial activity. She had access to my accounts, my networks, my resources. Whatever she has apparently built in the months since our separation, whatever relationship she has apparently entered into, a slight emphasis on apparently. The foundation of it was laid on access that I provided. He paused. I am not angry. I am clarifying. The room breathed. Selene breathed. Nico beside her had gone very still in a way that was not the stillness of a man who was calm. It was the stillness of a man who was choosing not to move. She was aware of it the way you were aware of pressure change before a storm. Mr. Vale, Judge Harrow said, have you concluded? I have, Your Honor. Then sit down, and let me be clear. The judge's voice had found the register Selene had heard once before, during a particularly aggressive exchange in month 3 of proceedings. It was not loud. It was worse than loud. This courtroom is not a press conference. The next person to use this bench as a platform for characterizing their spouse, or estranged spouse, or any other relational designation, in terms designed for an external audience rather than for the resolution of the legal matters before me, will be cited for contempt. Do I make myself understood? Silence. Good. She looked at both tables. We will continue with the preliminary asset testimony next Tuesday, at which point Ms. Kwan will also be recognized as co-counsel of record. The question of how this documentation affects classification of contested properties will be addressed in a separate filing which I expect from both parties by end of week. She closed her folder. We are adjourned. The gavel. The room moved. Grayson was on his feet before the gavel's echo died. He said something sharp and low to Diane, and she said something back, and he cut her off mid-sentence, which was something Selene had watched him do to people throughout their marriage, and which had never gotten less ugly to witness. Then he turned and looked across the room at Selene with a directness that all the photography in the world was going to capture and none of it was going to fully represent. He walked across the courtroom. His security, one man, understated, professional, followed 2 paces behind. Nico's 3 men shifted almost imperceptibly, a small collective adjustment like a tide going out before a wave came in. Nico himself didn't move. Grayson stopped at Selene's table. He looked at Nico first, a long assessment, the look of a man recalibrating. Then he looked at Selene. How long were you planning this? He said. Not a question. This isn't the place, Marcus said, stepping forward. I'm not talking to you. Grayson didn't look at Marcus. How long, Selene? She looked at him. She had spent 3 years being in rooms with this man and learning to read the specific frequencies of his anger. The cold anger, which was dangerous and patient. The hot anger, which was loud and passed quickly. And this, which was something she didn't have a clean word for. It was the anger of someone who had been outmaneuvered by someone they had genuinely not believed capable of outmaneuvering them. Grayson, she said, go home. You brought him into this. He stopped. His jaw worked. Do you understand what you've done? Do you have any concept of who? Another stop. The sentence couldn't complete itself because every completion led somewhere he couldn't say out loud in a room full of recording devices. You should go home, she said again. You have calls to make. Something moved in his face. Then he stepped back, looked at Nico one more time, that recalibrating look, and turned and walked out of the courtroom with his security and 2 of his attorneys and the rigid back of a man holding himself together by force of will. Diane Foss remained at the table, organizing papers. She looked up at Selene and her expression was unreadable and professional and contained, in its very blankness, a kind of communication. I know what's coming. I may not be able to stop it. She looked at Nico for half a second. Then she went back to her papers. The press had been hovering at the edge of the clear space Grayson's approach had created, and now that he was gone, they compressed forward. A woman Selene recognized from the financial desk of a major paper was closest. Young, sharp, with a recorder held at waist height and the practiced casual stance of someone who knew how to take up the right amount of space. Ms. Ashford, can you comment on the marriage? No comment, Marcus said. Mr. Varela. Nico said nothing. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair and put it on, methodical, unhurried, and in the unhurriedness was an answer that was more complete than any words would have been. He looked at Petra, who nodded slightly. He looked at Selene. Cars outside, he said. They walked out. The corridor was worse than the courtroom, tighter, louder, the press folding around them as they moved toward the elevator. Nico's people arranged themselves without being asked into a configuration that moved through the crowd efficiently and without aggression. Selene kept pace. She had her folder against her chest, and her face was still doing the thing she'd trained it to do, and her pulse was doing something entirely different underneath it. In the elevator, just the 2 of them, and Petra and one of Nico's men, Selene said, That went as expected. Close enough, Petra said. Foss is going to file a challenge to the prenuptial by end of day. It won't succeed, but it'll generate 3 to 4 days of coverage. Let it. The elevator opened into the building's lower lobby, another cluster of media outside the glass doors. Nico's man pushed through first, and they came out into the gray November air of lower Manhattan, and there was a car at the curb. Dark, large, already running. Selene stopped on the steps. She had not been outside since she'd entered the building at 8:45 that morning. It was now past noon. The air had that particular cold quality of a city in late autumn, exhaust and concrete, and something distant and clean above it all. She breathed it in for a moment. Beside her, Nico said quietly, You did well in there. She looked at him. In the daylight, outside the charged containment of the courtroom, he was different. Not less, but different. The angular face had more variation to it. There was something in the set of his eyes that was not tired exactly, weighted, like someone who had been making hard calculations for a long time and was very good at it, but had not stopped being aware of the cost. He's going to come back hard, she said. I know. Not just legally. He has people. He has... I know what he has. A pause. Do you trust me? The question surprised her, not because she hadn't considered it. She had considered almost nothing else for 6 months. But because he asked it directly, without softening it, and because it was the right question and asking it was the closest he had come in 6 months of careful professional partnership to saying, this is real, what we are doing, and what comes next will be harder than what just happened, and I need you to decide. She looked at him for a moment. Ask me again in a week, she said. He nodded, like that too was the right answer. Fair. They got in the car. She did not look back at the courthouse. She heard from inside the muffled noise of the press still assembling. She heard her phone, which Marcus had and would continue to have for the rest of the day, ringing with a frequency that suggested the story had already left the building. The car pulled into traffic. In her coat pocket, her fingers found the edge of a business card she had been carrying for 3 weeks. Matte black, single line of text, no name. A number. She had not called it yet. It was connected to someone Nico did not know she had been talking to. Someone who had information about Grayson that was not financial. Not the patents, not the shares, not the accounts. Something older and more specific and considerably more dangerous. She had been waiting to decide if she needed it. Sitting in the back of Nico Varela's car, traveling north through Manhattan traffic, while her divorce became a global news story and her estranged husband's fear became something she could use, she pressed the edge of the card with her thumb and thought, not yet. But the fact that she was still carrying it said something she didn't say out loud. Outside the window, the city moved. She watched it and thought about the thing Grayson had said in the courtroom, whatever she has apparently built, and the particular contempt in the word apparently, and she thought about where that contempt had come from, and she thought about what it would look like when he finally understood that the building had been happening longer than he knew, and that the architect of it was not only her, and that one of the things they had quietly built together, she and Nico, in the quiet months, in the careful meetings, and the reviewed documents, and the long silences where two people figured out if they could trust each other, was a structure that had Grayson's own signature on its foundation. He had signed something 4 years ago, a document during the marriage. In the middle of a deal he hadn't read because reading things carefully had never been the kind of task Grayson Vale considered necessary for a man of his standing. He was going to find out what he'd signed. She was not entirely certain when, but she knew what his face was going to do when he found out, and she knew it was going to happen in a room where she could watch it, and she pressed the edge of the card in her pocket and looked out the window and thought, soon. The phone Nico held, his, not hers, buzzed once. He looked at it. Something in his jaw changed in a way that was small and specific and that she had learned in 6 months to pay attention to. What? She said. He handed her the phone. On the screen was a message from a number with no contact name. 4 words. He moved the shares. Selene read it again. The car was still moving through traffic. The city was still outside the window. The card was still in her pocket. Everything they had set up today, the timing, the documents, the courtroom performance, the careful chess of this morning, had been predicated on the shares being frozen at the moment of disclosure. The legal team had been certain that the surprise factor would prevent any movement before the protective order could be filed. Someone had told Grayson in advance. Not about the marriage. He hadn't known about the marriage. But someone had told him, today, in those 22 minutes, or sometime in the last hour, that the shares needed to move now, before close of business, before Petra's filing reached the right desk. Someone inside. She looked at the message, looked at Nico. His face had the quality of a man who had already run several conclusions and arrived at the same place from different directions. How? She said. 1 word. I don't know yet. But someone... Yes. She handed the phone back, looked out the window again. The city, the traffic, the ordinary, terrible, ongoing business of a Tuesday in November. She thought about everyone who knew, Petra, Marcus. The two associates Petra had used to file the documentation. The registrar who had processed the marriage 8 months ago. Nico's own people, 3 of them. 4 if you counted the driver. She thought about Marcus's face when she'd told him about Petra. 6 months. The word landing like something heavier than it should have. She did not say this out loud. She put her hand in her coat pocket and her fingers found the card again, and this time she did not think not yet. The card had a number and she called it from the bathroom of Nico's Midtown office while he was on the phone with Petra and his financial people in the conference room down the hall, voices low and technical, the specific register of people running damage calculations. She ran the tap while the line connected. Old habit. From the months after she'd left Grayson, when she'd learned that sound carried in ways you didn't anticipate until it mattered. 2 rings. Then, I heard. The voice belonged to a man named Carson Hale. She had met him 4 months ago through a contact she was not going to name even to herself in a bathroom with the tap running. Carson was 50-something and had spent 11 years as a forensic investigator for a now-dissolved financial regulatory body and had opinions about Grayson Vale that predated Selene's marriage to him by several years. The shares moved, she said. I know. I've been watching the account. He used a shell registered in Delaware that traces back to a holding entity in the Caymans. The transfer happened at 12:47. 12:47. They had been in the elevator. She had been breathing November air on the courthouse steps. Can it be reversed? Not easily. The shell has 2 additional layers. By the time Petra gets the paperwork to freeze it, whoever is managing those layers will have moved it again. A pause. Someone told him today. Not before. He didn't know about the marriage beforehand. The reaction was real. But someone told him in that building, in that window, to move the money now. I know, she said. You have a theory. She looked at herself in the mirror above the sink. The tap was still running. Her face looked like the face that had been performing steadiness for approximately 6 hours and was now, in the privacy of a bathroom with the door locked, allowing itself to be something else. Not breaking. Not quite. But the seams were showing in a way they hadn't in the courtroom. I have a name, she said. I don't have proof yet. Get it fast, Carson said. Because what I'm looking at right now, what I've been looking at for the last 2 hours, is not just the shares. He's moving other things. The Meridian account has had 3 internal transfers since noon. He's restructuring Selene. He's burning it down and rebuilding it somewhere you can't reach. She turned off the tap. The bathroom went quiet. How long do we have? If he's aggressive, 48 hours before the structure is different enough that the existing documentation loses its relevance. She said nothing for a moment. In the mirror, her face did the thing it had been doing all day. The stillness, the controlled surface. But underneath it, something was moving fast, and it was not calm, and it was not strategic. It was the particular cold fear of watching something you built get dismantled in real time and being unable to stop it from where you were standing. Carson. She kept her voice level. The other thing. The thing you found in September. A longer pause this time. Selene, I need it. That information was meant to be a last resort. If we use it now, before we've established the financial fraud case properly, it becomes the story instead of the evidence. It gives Grayson something to react to instead of something to drown in. He's already drowning us. The financial case just lost its primary documentation. She looked at herself, steady eyes, unsteady everything else. I need the other thing. Using it has consequences that aren't just legal. I understand that. Another pause. She heard him breathing on the other end of the line. Then, I'll send it. Secure file, same protocol as before. But Selene, once you use this, you can't unuse it. Whatever you want the end of this to look like. I know what I want it to look like. He hung up. She stood in the bathroom for another 30 seconds. She looked at her own face and thought about what Carson had found in September and what it was going to do to everyone in its radius when it came out. Then she unlocked the door and walked back down the hall toward the conference room. She was 3 steps from the door when she heard it. The conference room door was not entirely closed, a half-inch gap where it hadn't caught. And through that gap came Nico's voice, lower than usual, and another voice she recognized, Petra, also low. And then a third voice, male, that it took her 2 seconds to place because she had only heard it in person twice and both times in passing. Daniel Reeves, Nico's chief of operations. She had met him once at a document signing, once in a lobby. Quiet man, competent seeming, the kind of person in the kind of role that was designed to be not memorable. She stopped outside the door. She wasn't deciding to listen. She was just stopped. Not sustainable past 48 hours, Daniel was saying, even with the filing. The filing buys time, Petra said. 36 hours minimum. 36 hours doesn't help us if Vale's already… Stop, Nico's voice. A single word with a quality that stopped things. What exactly did you tell Foss? Silence. 3 seconds of silence with the specific texture of a room in which someone has just been asked the question they were not prepared to be asked yet. Nico, Daniel. The word landed like something placed on glass. Careful, deliberate. What did you tell her? Selene's hand was against the wall beside the door. She was not moving. She was not breathing in any way she could feel. I told her about the prenuptial structure, Daniel said. His voice had changed. The competent quiet was gone. What was underneath it was something unsteady and trying not to show it. Not the marriage, not the timing of the documents, just that there was a financial agreement in place that affected the Caldwell shares. I thought… You thought, Nico said. I thought it would slow them down. If Foss knew the shares were going to be challenged, I thought she'd advise Vale to hold the position, not move it. I didn't think he'd… You didn't think. The voice was still quiet. That was the thing about it. It stayed quiet. You gave Diane Foss enough to know that today was the day to move the assets, and you dressed it up as strategy. That's not what I… Daniel. A pause. How much? The silence again. Daniel. 50,000. The words came out like something that had been held under pressure for a long time. Over 4 months. I didn't… It wasn't about her, Nico. It wasn't about hurting… Selene pushed the door open. The three of them turned. Petra, who was standing near the window with a legal pad, went very still. Daniel, who was at the far end of the conference table, looked at her with the specific expression of a man who has just been discovered and whose body hasn't decided yet whether to attempt an explanation or simply collapse. Nico was standing in the center of the room and he looked at Selene and his face was not blank. She had seen blank. This was something else. This was the face of a man containing something very large with very deliberate effort. She looked at Daniel. You told Foss about the prenuptial, she said. Daniel opened his mouth. Don't explain, she said. I heard the explanation. I'm asking you to confirm. A beat. Yes. She nodded once, like he'd confirmed a weather report. She looked at Nico. 48 hours, she said. Less, Nico said. Then we need to be in a different place. She put her bag on the table and sat down. The motion was very controlled. Everything was very controlled. She was aware, distantly, that there was something enormous moving underneath the control and that the control was necessary right now. In a way, it was going to stop being necessary very soon, but that was not now. Petra, where are we on the meridian freeze? Petra looked at her for a moment. A quick professional assessment of whether the person sitting down was actually as functional as they appeared, and then looked at her legal pad. I have a filing prepared, but the judge assigned to it went to lunch at 12:30, and her clerk says she's in meetings until… Call the clerk again. Tell them it's time sensitive. I did. They said, tell them it's fraudulent asset transfer. Use those words specifically. A different clerk will pick up the phone. Petra looked at her, then made the call. Nico walked around the table and sat down across from Selene. Not beside her. Across. He looked at her with that same contained quality, and she looked back at him, and the thing between them was not comfortable and was not supposed to be. I'm sorry, he said. Don't be sorry yet, she said. Be useful. A beat. Something moved in his face, not quite a reaction, more like a small acknowledgement. He leaned forward and pulled the laptop on the table toward him. Carson called you. Yes. The shell company? He's already tracked it 2 layers in. There's a third. By the time we get through the third, it'll have moved again. She looked at him directly. I need you to tell me what assets we have that aren't connected to anything Grayson can claim he influenced. Clean assets. Nothing that touches the original partnership structure. Why? Because if the financial case is compromised, I need a different foundation to stand on. She paused. What I'm going to do instead is going to make today look quiet. Nico looked at her for a long time. What did Carson give you? Something I've been holding since September. And you didn't tell me. You didn't tell me about Daniel. The words sat between them, factual, not accusatory. There was no accusation in her voice, just the weight of an equivalence. He absorbed it. In the far corner of the room, Daniel was still standing. He had the particular stillness of a man who had not been told to leave and was not going to make himself more visible by asking. Selene had been aware of him the entire time in the way you were aware of a problem you had already categorized and set aside. She looked at him now. Leave your phone on the table and go sit in the lobby. He looked at Nico. Do what she said, Nico said. Daniel put the phone on the table and walked out. Petra was still on her call, voice low and professional at the window, and Selene watched Nico's face while Nico looked at the door Daniel had just gone through. The thing he was containing had a shape now that she could see more clearly. It wasn't cold fury, though that was part of it. It was something older. The specific pain of a betrayal by someone you had trusted with things that required trust, which was its own category of damage, distinct from ordinary anger because it required you to revise not just the present situation, but your own prior judgment. She knew what that felt like. She had sat in a different room, in a different year, and revised her own prior judgment about a man, and the revision had been so total that it had required her to rebuild the entire structure of how she understood herself. She was not going to say this to Nico. It wasn't the moment, and it wasn't what he needed. But she noticed it. The thing Carson found, Nico said, still looking at the door. How bad? For Grayson? For you? She considered. It doesn't touch me. It predates our marriage by 3 years. It's about what Grayson did to establish the initial Vale Innovations capital. She paused. The source of the startup funding, where it actually came from. Nico turned and looked at her. His eyes had that weighted quality again, sharper now. How did Carson find it? He's been looking since before I met you. He had a case, a different case, an earlier one, that was closed before it reached anything formal. Grayson was adjacent to it. Carson never stopped pulling on the thread. What's on the thread? She looked at him steadily. The original seed capital for Vale Innovations, the $14 million that Grayson has told every journalist and every investor and every profile writer for 12 years that he raised through legitimate early-stage funding. A significant portion of it came from a source that is not clean. Not criminal in the way that makes headlines. Political. The kind of money that moves through the right channels and comes out looking legal, but isn't, because the channels themselves aren't what they appear to be. She paused. There are 3 executives at Vale Innovations who knew. 2 of them have been with Grayson since the beginning. One of them signed a document in year 2 that suggests awareness of the source. And Carson has the document. Carson has the document, the wire records, and the testimony of a 4th party who has been waiting for a reason to speak. She watched his face. If this comes out, it doesn't just end the divorce case. It ends the company. The investors will pull out before the week is over. The board will move within days. And the federal case that's been circling becomes a different case, Nico said. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Outside the conference room window, Manhattan was doing what Manhattan did in the middle of the afternoon. Continuous, indifferent. The city that processed everything and was changed by nothing. Selene had grown up 30 miles outside it, and had always found it either oppressive or reassuring depending on the day. Today, it was both. Why didn't you tell me in September? Nico said. Because in September, I didn't know if I was going to use it, and because... She stopped, chose the next words carefully. Because it changes the nature of this. What we're doing. It stops being a divorce proceeding with strategic elements and becomes something else. Something else, he repeated. Something that he will not recover from, ever. Not financially, not legally, not reputationally. If I use this, I have to be certain that's what I want. That I'm not doing it in a moment when I'm frightened and the plan is falling apart, and it feels necessary because of the momentum of the situation. Are you frightened right now? The question was direct the way he was direct. No softening, no editorial, just the question placed in front of her and left there. She considered lying, considered the version of steadiness that didn't acknowledge its own cost. Then she said, "Yes." He nodded. "Are you using it because you're frightened?" She thought about the car, the 4 words on his phone, the shares moving at 12:47 while she stood on courthouse steps breathing cold air. She thought about Grayson's face in the courtroom, not the anger, the fear. And she thought about what fear made Grayson do, which was the same thing it made most people do: move fast and break things and leave a trail of damage that they told themselves was acceptable collateral. "No," she said. "I'm using it because he just proved that given 48 hours he will dismantle everything we've built in a way that legal process cannot stop in time. And this is the only thing that stops him faster than he can move." Nico looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Send me the file when Carson delivers it." "This is my, I know it's yours. I'm not taking it from you." His voice was even. "I want to read it before you use it so I understand what I'm standing next to when you do." A pause. "That's what partnership means. Not that I control what you do, that I see it." Something moved in her chest that she didn't have a clean word for. "Okay," she said. Petra ended her call. She turned from the window with the expression of someone who had navigated a bureaucratic obstacle and was not entirely pleased about the manner in which she'd had to do it. "I reached a different clerk. The filing is being processed. We should have a temporary freeze order on the Meridian account within 3 hours, which will prevent further internal transfers." She paused. "It won't reverse what already moved." "I know," Selene said. That's okay." Petra looked at her. "The shares are gone for now, Selene. Without the shares, the primary claim against—" "I know." She opened her bag. Her hands were steady. She thought about that, the steadiness of her hands, and about what it cost and how long it had been costing her, and she thought, soon it won't have to cost this much. "The strategy has changed. Give me 30 minutes and I'll explain the new structure." Petra and Nico exchanged a glance. Selene didn't look at it. She was looking at her phone, at the secure message application, watching for the notification that would tell her Carson's file had arrived. It arrived at 3:41. She opened it, read the first 3 pages, closed it. "Okay," she said, to no one in particular. Her phone buzzed, a number she didn't recognize. She looked at it for a moment, unknown, no contact, not Carson's protocol, and answered. "Ms. Ashford?" The voice was male, controlled, not young, the kind of voice that had learned to carry authority without needing volume to do it. "I think we should speak." "Who is this?" "My name is Warren Lind. I'm a senior partner at a firm you have no reason to have heard of. I've been retained in the last 2 hours by a client you have every reason to know." Something in her went very still. "Grayson." "Yes." A pause. "I want to be direct with you. My client is aware that the nature of the proceedings today has changed in ways he did not anticipate, and he is open. I want to emphasize that, open, to a comprehensive settlement discussion that would address all outstanding issues in a manner that avoids further litigation." She said nothing. Across the table, Nico was watching her face. "Ms. Ashford, the offer on the table, and I want to be clear, this is preliminary." "What does he want?" she said. A beat. "Mutual non-disclosure on all matters pertaining to the history of Vale Innovation's founding. All existing claims resolved in a structure that provides Ms. Ashford with significant financial security. In exchange for the information you currently hold regarding the company's—" "No." Silence. "Ms. Ashford, the financial package we're prepared to tell Grayson no." She looked at Nico while she said it. His face told her nothing except that he was paying attention. "Tell him the offer isn't the issue. The issue is that he had 11 months to settle this fairly and chose to perform instead. Today he chose to move assets instead. I've spent 3 years watching him choose the wrong thing at every turn because he believed the consequences wouldn't reach him." She picked up her pen. "The consequences are going to reach him." "Ms. Ashford, don't call this number again." She ended the call. The conference room was very quiet. Then Petra said carefully, "If Grayson is already trying to settle, it means he's read what you have. Or he's guessing at it, and the guess scared him enough to—" "He doesn't know what we have," Selene said. "He knows we have something. He's been knowing probably for weeks. This is a containment move." She looked at the phone. "He's going to try to buy silence before we can make noise." "And your answer is no," Nico said. "My answer is no." Nico leaned back in his chair. There was something in the set of his jaw that she was learning to read. The specific tension that appeared when he had reached a conclusion, and the conclusion was not comfortable, but was clear. "Then we need to understand something," he said. "Once you use Carson's material, Grayson is going to stop trying to buy silence and start trying to create noise of his own. Whatever he has on either of us, he doesn't have anything on me. He'll create it if he doesn't have it." He looked at her steadily. "I need you to understand what that means. He has resources, and he has people who are comfortable with that kind of work, and he has nothing left to lose if the company is going down anyway." A pause. "He's going to go after you, personally, not legally." "I know. I want to make sure you actually know, not strategically know. Know." She looked at him. He was sitting across the table in the afternoon light of a midtown office building, and he had just had his chief of operations revealed as a paid informant and was facing the unraveling of a 6-month plan and was still, looking at her with the specific quality of a man who needed her to understand the thing he was saying, not the surface of it, the actual weight of it. She said, "Grayson Vale has been trying to make me afraid for 3 years. He is very good at it. He knows what I'm afraid of because he spent 3 years in close proximity to me, and he paid attention to that information, and he has used it, methodically, at every stage of this process." She put both hands flat on the table. "I know exactly what's coming. I knew when I made the call to Carson. I knew when I walked into that courtroom this morning." She looked at Nico. "I'm not asking you to protect me from it." "I know you're not. Then stop warning me." A long pause. Then something in his face shifted. Not softening, exactly. More like a recalibration, like a man who had been bracing against something and suddenly found the thing he was bracing against wasn't pushing back the way he'd expected. "All right," he said. "Good." She turned to Petra. "Here's the new structure." She talked for 20 minutes. Petra took notes. Nico listened. Outside the windows, the afternoon was moving into the early dark of November, and the city was becoming its lit nighttime version, floor after floor of lit windows in every direction, other people in other rooms making other decisions. At 4:58, Selene's phone rang again. This time it was Marcus. "You need to see something," Marcus said, and his voice had the particular compressed quality that she recognized as a man delivering news he wished he wasn't delivering. "It just went up, across 3 different outlets simultaneously." "What did?" "A story. About you, and it's—" He stopped, started again. "Selene, it's not about the divorce. It's about 3 years ago, before the marriage. There's a financial irregularity being alleged, money that moved through an account connected to your family. Before you and Grayson, before any of this. It's being framed as evidence of a pattern." She went very still. "What account?" "An account in your mother's name. Selene, there are wire transfer records. Marcus." Her voice was flat and careful and very controlled. "Those records are fabricated." "I believe you. That doesn't matter right now because they're already published. Across 3 outlets. And 2 of them have significant reach in financial media." A pause. "Whoever leaked this, they didn't just leak it, they packaged it. There's a narrative attached, a source quoted as close to the Vale legal team. This took days to prepare, Selene, maybe longer." She looked at Nico across the table. He was watching her face. Petra had stopped writing. Her mother's name. She thought about her mother, who was 61 and lived in a small house outside Hartford, and had approximately nothing to do with any of this, and whose name was now in 3 financial publications attached to words like irregularity and pattern and alleged transfer. She thought about how Grayson had always known, with the specific precision of someone who had paid close attention, that the way to reach Selene Ashford was not through Selene Ashford, but through the people she could not protect by being strong on her own behalf. She thought about the black card, Carson's file, The secure message sitting on her phone. $14 million. 3 executives. 1 signed document. A 4th witness who had been waiting for a reason. The reason was here. "Send me the links," she said to Marcus. "I'll call you in an hour." She put the phone down. The conference room waited. She looked at the file on her phone. She looked at Nico. She thought about what Carson had said. Once you use this, you can't unuse it. She thought about her mother's name in 3 publications. She opened the file and looked at Nico and said, in a voice that was very quiet and completely certain, "I need you to make a call." To who? The financial journalist at the Chronicle, the one who's been trying to reach you for 6 months about Vail Innovations. Nico held her gaze. "You understand what happens after that call?" "Yes." "There's no version of tomorrow that looks like today." "I know." She looked at him steadily across the table in the failing November light, with her mother's name in 3 publications and Carson's file on her phone and the entire architecture of a plan that had been patient and careful and strategic for 6 months now fully broken open, requiring something different. Something that was not patient. Something that was not careful. Something that had been building since the moment Grayson Vail had looked at her across a packed courtroom and smiled the smile of a man who believed in the permanence of his own power. "Make the call," she said. And the room was very quiet, while Nico Varela picked up his phone, and outside the window the city blazed with its 10,000 lit windows. And Selene Ashford, Nico made the call at 5:12 in the afternoon, and it lasted 4 minutes, and he said very little because the journalist on the other end, a woman named Rachel Thorne, who had been covering corporate financial crime for the Chronicle for 9 years, and who had been trying to reach Nico Varela through 4 different intermediaries for 6 of those months, did most of the talking once she understood what was being offered. Selene sat across the table and listened to Nico's half of it. 3 sentences. A confirmation. A time. Then he put the phone down. "Tomorrow morning," he said. 7 a.m. She's pulling her editor in tonight. She'll need Carson's documentation. I told her a source would deliver it by midnight. He looked at her. Carson agreed? Carson's been waiting longer than either of us. Selene was already typing on her phone. The message to Carson was 6 words. He replied in under a minute. She showed Nico the screen. He nodded. Petra was on her own phone at the window, dealing with the meridian freeze in the specific low-urgent tone of someone fighting a bureaucratic timeline. The room had the quality of a place where several things were happening simultaneously, and each of them mattered, and none of them could wait for the others. Selene looked at the 3 links Marcus had sent. She read them. She read them the way you read something that is about someone you love, slowly, carefully, with the specific attention of someone who needs to know the exact shape of the damage before they can do anything about it. The articles were cleanly written, professional. The fabricated wire transfer records were presented with enough technical detail to look credible to anyone who didn't know what they were looking at. The source quoted as close to the Vail legal team was careful and consistent across all 3 pieces, which meant a single person had been placed as a source in 3 separate newsrooms, which meant preparation, which meant this had been in motion before today. Before today. Before the courtroom. Before the shares moved. Grayson had been running 2 tracks. She put the phone face down on the table. He planned this before this morning, she said. Nico looked up. The articles. They went up simultaneously. 3 outlets. Same source, same documentation package. That takes days to place. He was preparing this while we were preparing the courtroom. She looked at him. He knew something was coming. He didn't know what. So he prepared a counterstrike in advance and held it ready, and the moment today went wrong for him, he released it. Which means Daniel gave him more than the prenuptial structure. Daniel gave him enough to know that today was going to be a problem. Grayson did the rest himself. She picked up her phone again, turned it over, looked at the screen. He went after my mother because he knew I'd move faster. He wanted me to make a mistake, to use Carson's material before we were positioned for it. But we're already using it. We're using it on our timeline. He wanted panic. He wanted me to drop it in the wrong place and blow the blast radius in the wrong direction. She looked at Nico with something that was not quite calm but was adjacent to it. The specific clarity that came after the worst moment, when the shock settled and what was left was just the problem and the available options. I'm not panicking. I know, he said. Don't say it like you're relieved. I'm saying it like it's true. She stood up. I need to go see my mother tonight. Nico stood as well. I'll come. You don't... Selene. He said it simply without pressure. I'll come. She looked at him for a moment, then, we leave in an hour. The hour was spent in motion. Petra filed 3 documents and made 8 calls, and at one point had a conversation with opposing counsel's office that Selene could hear from across the room, and that was professional in the way that a very sharp object was professional. Precise, without unnecessary movement, drawing blood by design. Marcus called twice. Selene talked to him the second time for 11 minutes, and when she hung up, she had a clearer picture of what the next 72 hours needed to look like. And the picture was not comfortable, but it was navigable, which was all she needed it to be. At 6:15, they were in the car heading north out of the city. Selene's mother, Ruth Ashford, lived 40 minutes outside Manhattan in a house she had owned for 22 years. A small colonial on a street of similar houses with a garden that was her primary occupation and a stubbornness about staying put that her daughter had inherited and neither of them would acknowledge directly. Selene had called ahead. Ruth had said, I saw it online, in the tone of a woman who had learned to be unsurprised by catastrophe but had not learned to be unbothered by it. And those were different things. The drive was mostly quiet. Outside the car, the city gave way to the particular landscape of the outer suburbs in late November. Bare trees and lit windows and the dark between them. The world compressing into small warm pockets of light separated by cold and distance. Nico did not fill the silence. She had noticed this about him. The ability to occupy silence without making it uncomfortable, without the nervous energy that turned quiet into pressure. He looked out the window. His hand rested on the seat between them, and he was not touching her, and she was aware of that the way you were aware of the exact distance between things, when the distance mattered. He'll escalate tonight, she said, into the silence. Probably. What does that look like for your side? He was quiet for a moment. I have 3 holdings that are adjacent to the partnership structure we built together. If he's looking for leverage, those are the most visible. He paused. I've had people monitoring the perimeter on those accounts for 6 months. If anything moves, I know within minutes. The perimeter on those accounts, she said, or the people managing those accounts. A beat. Both, he said. She nodded. After Daniel, I'm not taking anything on faith that I can verify instead. His voice was level, not angry. The anger, she thought, was somewhere under the level, and it was staying there by choice. She looked out her window. A town went by. A gas station, a pharmacy, a parking lot. The ordinary infrastructure of ordinary life going about its business at 6:30 on a Tuesday evening, indifferent to all of it. I'm sorry about Daniel, she said. Nico said nothing for a moment. He was with me for 7 years. I know. 7 years is... He stopped. It's a long time to read someone wrong. You didn't read him wrong for 7 years. He read the situation and made a choice. She looked at him. Those are different things. He was quiet. Then, is that what you told yourself about Grayson? The question sat in the car with them. She had not expected it, and she suspected he had not entirely planned it. It had the quality of something that came out of a longer thought, the visible part of something submerged. She looked at his profile, the angular jaw, the weighted eyes watching the road. Yes, she said, for about 3 months. Then I told myself the truth instead, which was that I saw what I wanted to see because I needed to see it. That's not his fault, and it's not a failure of reading. It's just what people do. She looked back at the window. The lesson isn't read better. The lesson is verify more. He absorbed this. You verified, she said. That's why we're still in the fight. The car turned onto her mother's street at 6:54. Ruth Ashford opened the door before Selene reached it. She was a small woman, compact in the way of someone who had done physical work her whole life, with silver gray hair cut short and practical, and eyes the same dark brown as Selene's, currently occupied with an expression that was working very hard at being neutral. She looked at Selene, then at Nico, 2 steps behind. She said nothing about Nico. She stepped back and let them in. The house smelled like it always smelled. something with onion and rosemary, the particular warmth of a small house in winter. The television in the living room was off. Ruth had turned it off, Selene knew, when she'd called ahead. Her mother's version of saying, "I'm not watching this be a news story. I'm waiting for you to tell me what it actually is." They sat at the kitchen table. Ruth put coffee in front of them without asking. "Tell me about the account," Ruth said. "It's fabricated," Selene said. "I know that." Ruth's voice was flat. "I know every account I've ever had, and what's in them, and where the money came from, because your father and I had nothing for a long time, and when you have nothing, you pay attention to money in a way that people who've always had it don't." She looked at Selene directly. "I know it's fabricated. I want to know what I need to do." "Nothing yet. Marcus is going to need a signed statement from you. He'll call tomorrow." "Fine." Ruth's hands were around her coffee mug. They were steady. "Who did this?" "Grayson." "Obviously Grayson." She said the name the way she'd always said it. Not with heat, with a kind of dry precision, like naming a specific type of weather. "I mean, who helped him? Something like this. Putting wire records into a news story, getting it into 3 places at once. That takes someone who knows how those newsrooms work." Selene looked at her mother. Ruth Ashford had never been a formally educated woman, but she was one of the sharpest people Selene had ever known, and she knew it in the same quiet way she knew everything, without needing to say it. "We're working on that," Selene said. Ruth looked at Nico for the first time directly. He had been sitting to Selene's left, hands around his own mug, present without intruding. Doing the silence thing again, which Ruth had noticed because Ruth noticed everything. "You're the husband," Ruth said. "Yes, ma'am." "She told me about you 2 months ago." Nico glanced at Selene. Selene looked at her coffee. "She told me enough," Ruth said. "Not everything. She doesn't tell me everything, and I don't ask for everything because some things are hers to hold." She studied him. "You're here at 7 in the evening on the worst day of this whole mess. That's something." "She needed to be here," Nico said. "I came with her." Ruth looked at him for another moment. Then she looked at Selene. "You're going to be okay." "Mom, I'm not saying it to comfort you. I'm saying it because I know you." She said it without sentiment, the way she said true things. "You've been building towards something for a long time. I've watched you build it. I don't understand all the pieces, but I can see the shape of it. And it's not the shape of something that falls apart because one piece gets knocked out." She picked up her coffee. "Now, tell me what you actually need from me tonight." Selene felt something in her chest that she was not going to allow to become visible. She breathed through it. "Just this," she said. "Just being here." Ruth nodded once, like that was a perfectly reasonable operational requirement. "Then stay for an hour. I made soup." They stayed for 90 minutes. Ruth served soup and did not watch the news and did not ask questions that were actually comments in disguise. Nico ate soup at the kitchen table of a house he'd never been in before, with the ease of a man who could adapt to any environment because he had trained himself to. And somewhere in the second half of the hour, Ruth said something dry about the garden, and Nico responded, and they had a brief, specific conversation about the particular soil conditions of the Northeast in late autumn that had nothing to do with anything and was, somehow, exactly right. In the car back to the city at 8:45, Selene said, "She likes you. She's reserving judgment. For my mother, that's liking you." He made a sound that was almost something warmer than his usual register. Almost. Her phone had been going steadily since they'd left the office. She'd been managing it in batches to Marcus, Petra, Carson, 2 contacts she wasn't going to name in a car. And the picture that assembled itself from those batches was this. Grayson's team had gone fully aggressive across 3 fronts. The fabricated records had been picked up by 2 additional outlets. A second source, quoted anonymously, had appeared in a financial blog with significant readership, adding a new dimension to the story. Now, it wasn't just Selene's alleged past irregularities. It was an implication that Nico's financial structure was built on her introduction of dirty money. They were trying to take Nico down alongside her. She showed him the blog post. His jaw did the small specific thing. "They think that hurts you," she said. "It doesn't." "I know. But they think it does, which means they're still operating on bad information about what you actually are. She looked at the screen. They think you're someone who can be damaged by implication, rumor, reputational pressure. Most people in my position are. But you built your position differently than most people in your position. She looked at him, which is something Grayson never bothered to investigate because he assumed you were operating from the same playbook he'd be operating from if he were you. A pause. What playbook is that? Power through visibility, the kind of power that requires other people to see it to exist. She put the phone down. Your power doesn't require that. He was quiet for a moment. The city was coming back into view ahead of them. The particular glow of it against the November sky, the density of it rising. No, he said, it doesn't. That's why he can't actually hurt you. He can make noise. He can't find the foundation. She looked at the glow. He's been trying to figure out your foundation for 2 hours, and he hasn't found it, and that's making him go faster and faster, which means... Her phone rang. Carson, she answered. Tell me. The Chronicle story is set. Carson's voice had a quality she hadn't heard in it before, a compressed energy. The sound of a man who had been waiting 11 years for a particular door to open and could hear the handle turning. Rachel Thorne has been on the documentation for 3 hours. She's got a financial forensics expert reviewing the wire records tonight. They're publishing at 6 a.m. Does Grayson know? Not yet. He will by midnight. Someone will tip him. But by then, the story will be locked and in the queue, and there's nothing he can do to stop publication without making the attempt itself part of the story. What about the 3 executives? 2 are reachable. One of them called me an hour ago. He's been carrying this for 9 years, and I think... Carson paused. I think he's relieved, honestly. The document he signed in year 2, he's known it was there. He's been waiting for someone to find it. He'll go on record? He'll go on record. Selene closed her eyes for 2 seconds, then opened them. Okay. There's something else. Carson's voice shifted. The 4th party, the witness I mentioned, Schwat, the one who's been waiting for a reason. What about him? He came forward this afternoon, didn't wait for a call, saw the articles about you and your mother and called my cell directly. He has a sworn statement prepared and he wants to deliver it personally. A pause. His name is Philip Crane. He was Grayson's original financial advisor at the time the company was founded. He structured the initial capitalization. Another pause. He's been trying to find a way out of this for 6 years. She was very still in the back of the car. He structured it, all of it, and he's willing to put that in writing. He already has, Carson breathed. Selene, this is everything. This is the whole structure from the beginning. If Crane testifies, and the Chronicle runs the wire records, and the executive confirms the year 2 document, there is no version of Grayson Vale's story that survives contact with all 3 at once. She thought about Grayson in the courtroom this morning. The performance, the audience, the specific cruelty of a man who believed in the permanence of his own narrative. Carson, she kept her voice even, does Crane understand what testifying means for him personally? He's been living with what protecting Grayson has meant for him personally for 6 years. A pause. He says he'd like to sleep again. She ended the call. Nico was watching her. The car was crossing back into the city now, the bridge and the water and the lit towers rising. Crane, she said. The name was enough. She'd told Nico about Crane 6 weeks ago, in the abstract. The theoretical 4th witness, the original advisor, the person she hadn't been able to reach. He came forward. Something moved in Nico's face. Not surprise, something deeper than surprise. The particular shift of a person who has been holding tension for a long time around a single pivotal uncertainty and has just watched the uncertainty resolve. Tonight, she said, we need to be in the same building. Grayson's going to find out about Crane before morning, and when he does, he'll move. Yes. What does moving look like? He has 2 people, not legal people, not PR people. She looked at Nico directly. The kind of people he's used twice before in situations that didn't make it to litigation. Nico's face was very still. I know about them, she said. Carson identified them 8 weeks ago. One is a man named Garrett who handles pressure application, the specific kind of pressure that doesn't leave documentation. The second is a woman named Claire Voss who specializes in information acquisition through means that are not legal. She paused. If Grayson sends them tonight, they'll go after the witness first. Crane. Can Carson protect Crane? Carson has contacts, but it'll take calls and time and I have someone faster, Nico said. He already had his phone out. He looked at her. Crane needs to be in a different location by 10 p.m. Nico. This is what I do. He said it without arrogance, plain fact. This specific thing is what I do. Let me. She looked at him. She thought about the balance of this, what she owed, what she was willing to owe, what the distinction between partnership and dependence actually looked like from the inside when you were in the middle of it, and exhausted, and your mother's name was in 3 publications, and the man across from you was offering the specific competence you needed right now. Do it, she said. He made the call. She listened to enough of it to understand that Crane was going to be moved to a location that Nico's person would name and that 2 individuals she did not know would be responsible for his safety through the night. The call lasted 6 minutes. When it ended, Nico put his phone down and said, "Done." They were in the city now. The car moved through midtown traffic. "The shareholder meeting," she said. "Vale Innovations emergency meeting. When did Grayson schedule it?" "Tomorrow afternoon, 4 p.m. Nico looked at her. "The board called it, technically, but Grayson set the conditions for calling it. He thinks he's going to use it to reassure investors before the story breaks." "The story breaks at 6 a.m. "Yes. Which means by 4 p.m. he's walking into that meeting already drowning." She looked at the city, the traffic, the specific lit crowdedness of Midtown on a November evening. "I want to be in that building." Nico was quiet for a moment. "The meeting is closed to what?" "I know." She looked at him. "I want to be in that building." He held her gaze. She could see him calculating. The logistics of it, the risk, the particular image of Selene Ashford walking into a Vale Innovations shareholder meeting the morning after the Chronicle published the definitive account of the company's fraudulent founding. "All right," he said. Her phone buzzed. "Marcus." She answered. "Grayson's team just filed an emergency injunction," Marcus said. His voice had the quality of a man delivering news at altitude, the compressed urgency of someone who needed her to understand the timeline without spending time on framing. "They're trying to block the Chronicle publication. They're claiming the documentation is stolen proprietary material." "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that Carson Hale obtained it through channels that constitute unauthorized access to Vale Innovations' internal records." "Did he?" A beat. "That's a complicated question." Marcus. "Carson's methodology in obtaining certain documents is defensible, legally defensible if it goes to a hearing, but an emergency injunction doesn't go to a full hearing. It goes to a duty judge tonight, and if that judge grants a temporary restraining order, the Chronicle can't publish at 6. Correct, she thought. The car was slowing, traffic thickening. Beside her, Nico was reading something on his phone. His face did the jaw thing again. She glanced at his screen and he tilted it toward her. An alert from a financial monitoring service. 3 of the Vale Innovations board members had made after-hours calls to a law firm that was not Vale's usual outside counsel. The board was already moving, not with Grayson, away from him. She looked back at the road. She thought about the injunction, the duty judge, the timeline. She thought about Philip Crane in whatever new location Nico's person was moving him to right now, with his 6-year-old sworn statement and the particular exhaustion of a man who had been living inside someone else's lie long enough that releasing it felt like laying down weight. "Tell Rachel Thorne," she said to Marcus, "that if they get the TRO, the Chronicle should immediately publish whatever portion of the story doesn't rely on the documentation Carson provided. The source testimony, the executive on record, the Year 2 document, which came from the executive directly, not from Carson." She paused. "The wire records are Carson's material. Everything else is independently sourced. A TRO on Carson's documentation doesn't touch the rest." Silence. Then, "That might actually work. Call her now." She ended the call. Nico was looking at her. "The board," she said, nodding at his phone. 3 of them, possibly 4. There's a 4th number I'm having confirmed. He put the phone down. They've been watching the company's valuation over the last 6 months. The Caldwell shares, the patent disputes, the SEC inquiry that started in August. There's been an SEC inquiry since August? Preliminary. Informal. Nothing filed. He met her eyes. Carson doesn't know about it. It came through a different channel. She stared at him. Nico. It was preliminary. I didn't know if it was going to develop into anything actionable, and I didn't want to. You didn't want to. She stopped. She breathed. She looked at him with the specific quality of a woman who had made a decision 6 months ago to trust a particular person and was currently revising the terms of that decision in real time. If there's an SEC inquiry and Rachel Thorne finds out about it independently, she won't. It's informal. The person who told me has no connection to the publication. He paused. But it means when the story breaks tomorrow, the SEC context already exists. They'll move from preliminary to formal within days. She absorbed this. The car was stopped in traffic. Outside the window, a cab was honking at something irrelevant. The city, doing what it always did. What else? She said. He looked at her. That's everything. Nico. She said it quietly. What else? A long pause. The traffic began moving again. The cab stopped honking. The Caldwell shares, he said. The ones that moved today. I know where they went. She waited. They're in an account that I have a secondary connection to. Not a direct connection. 3 layers removed. He said it carefully. The way you said a thing you'd been deciding whether to say. When Grayson moved them, he moved them somewhere he thought was untouchable. He didn't know, couldn't have known, that one of the entities in that chain has a silent partner whose interests I've been managing for 4 years. She looked at him. She understood what he was saying. She understood the full weight of it, what it meant about the depth of Nico Varela's reach, the specific invisible architecture of influence that gossip and journalism had tried to map and failed, and why it had failed, and what it meant that she was sitting inside that architecture right now, in this car, on this night. You can see the shares, she said. I can do more than see them. He held her gaze. If you want them back. The car stopped in front of the Midtown building. His building. The driver said nothing. The lobby was lit and ordinary through the glass. She looked at Nico Varela and thought about the 6 months, the documents and the meetings and the careful negotiations of trust. The way he'd said, "Do you trust me?" on the courthouse steps, which felt like years ago now and was in fact 11 hours ago. She thought about Daniel and what betrayal looked like when it came from inside something you'd built. She thought about her mother at the kitchen table with coffee and the particular steadiness of a woman who had learned that the ground could give way and had chosen to stand on it anyway. She thought about Grayson Vale at 4 p.m. tomorrow, walking into a shareholder meeting in a building that had his name on it, expecting to perform his way back to solid ground. She thought about what it would mean for her to be in that building. She looked at Nico. Bring the car around tomorrow at 3, she said. Something shifted in his face. The weighted eyes held hers and the jaw was set, and he said, 3 o'clock. Yes. She opened the door. The November air hit her face, cold and immediate. And tomorrow, you're going to tell me everything. Everything you know that I don't. All of it. Before we walk in. Yes, he said. She stepped out, looked back at him once, his face in the car's interior light, angular and certain and carrying whatever it was carrying, and she said, "Get some sleep." She walked into the building. The elevator doors closed behind her, and she stood in the mirrored box rising toward the floor Petra had commandeered as a temporary operations center, and she looked at her own reflection, and her own reflection looked back at her. The navy suit, the controlled face, the shadows under the eyes she hadn't bothered to conceal with much. And somewhere in the city below her, Grayson Vale was reading an injunction filing and making calls and sending people and running the particular math of a man who had just realized the walls were moving and couldn't yet calculate how fast. The elevator reached the floor. The doors opened. Petra was at the table with 3 laptops, and Marcus was on the phone, and Carson had sent a file update, and Rachel Thorne had replied to Marcus, and Philip Crane was in a car heading to a safe location, and the board members were making calls, and the Chronicle was restructuring its 6 a.m. publication, and somewhere in the invisible architecture of a power that didn't require visibility to exist, the Caldwell shares were sitting in an account 3 layers removed from a man who thought he'd found safety and distance. Selene walked in, put her bag on the table, and said, "Tell me where we are." And Petra began talking, and Marcus ended his call and joined in, and the night opened up in front of them like terrain to be crossed, and Selene Ashford stood at the edge of it with clear eyes and steady hands, and the particular quality of a person who had already paid the highest price they were going to pay, and was now moving through the aftermath of the payment towards something that was finally. The Chronicle published at 6:04 in the morning. Selene knew the exact minute because she was awake and had been awake since 4:30, sitting at the window of the temporary office with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, and the particular stillness of someone who had stopped trying to manage what was coming and had simply decided to be present for it. The city below was doing its pre-dawn thing, the specific quiet of a place that never fully slept but had a register, in the hours before light, that was closer to rest than anything else it managed. At 6:04, her phone showed the notification. She did not click it immediately. She sat with it for a moment, the way you sat with something you had been moving toward for a long time before you let yourself arrive at it. Then she read it. Rachel Thorne had written the piece with the specific economy of a journalist who understood that the material was doing the work, and her job was to stay out of its way. The headline was plain. The subheading was plainer. The documentation, the wire records, the Year 2 agreement, Philip Crane's sworn testimony, the on-record executive, the SEC inquiry that had apparently not been as invisible as Nico had believed, assembled itself in the text with the quiet inevitability of a case being made by someone who knew it was already won and was simply laying it out for the record. Philip Crane's testimony was the center of it. He had spoken for 4 hours to Rachel Thorne and her editor and a Chronicle attorney, and what he said in those 4 hours was this: that the $14 million that had founded Vail Innovations had not come from the sources Grayson Vail had described in 12 years of interviews and profiles and shareholder meetings, and that Crane had known this from the beginning because he had structured the arrangement himself, and that he had spent 6 years attempting to find a way to live with this knowledge and had failed, and that when he had seen Selene Ashford's mother's name in 3 publications attached to fabricated wire records, something in him had finished with waiting. He was quoted twice. Both quotes were short. The first was about the money. The second was one sentence: "I made him what he was, and I've been paying for it every day since." Selene read that sentence twice. Then she put the phone down and looked at the city going gray in the early light and thought about Philip Crane in a safe location somewhere in this city, having laid down what he'd been carrying for 6 years, and she thought about what it cost to carry something like that and what it cost to put it down. And she thought both costs were probably higher than anyone who hadn't carried a similar thing would understand. At 6:22, Petra called. "The board has been in emergency session since 6:10, Petra said. She sounded like someone who had slept 3 hours and considered that sufficient. "I have a contact inside who says Grayson arrived at the Vail Innovations building at 6:15. He's in the executive conference room with the 2 executives who aren't on record." A pause. "The one who is on record called in sick this morning and isn't answering his phone." "That's fear," Selene said. "Yes, but it's the fear of someone who already jumped. He's not reversing course." Another pause. "The injunction was denied at 5:58. Duty judge reviewed the materials and found insufficient basis for a TRO. Grayson's legal team is filing a second motion, but it's not going to get any traction after publication." She paused again, which was uncharacteristic. Petra's pauses were usually precise, purposeful, not hesitant. "Selene, the SEC called at 6:18. Selene was quiet. "It's formal now," Petra said. "The inquiry. A field agent will be at Vail Innovations today. My contact says it was already in motion before the Chronicle piece. The story accelerated the timeline. It didn't create it." She exhaled. "This is happening very fast." "I know." "The shareholder meeting is still scheduled for 4 p.m. The board hasn't canceled it yet. My read is they're waiting to see if Grayson attempts to step down voluntarily before— He won't, Selene said. Not voluntarily. No, Petra agreed. I didn't think so either. Nico arrived at the office at 7:45. He looked like a man who had slept 4 hours and would have preferred 6, but had made peace with 4. He brought coffee, actual hot coffee, from somewhere, in paper cups, and he put one in front of Selene without ceremony and sat down across from her and opened his laptop. "Daniel," he said, without preamble. She had not thought about Daniel since the conference room yesterday. There had been too many other things occupying the space where Daniel sat. Now she looked at Nico and waited. "He's been cooperative," Nico said. The word cooperative had a specific texture in his mouth. Not warm, not cold, factual in the way of a man describing a situation he had already categorized. "He gave me the full account this morning, 4 months of contact with Foss's office. The initial approach was through an intermediary. He didn't go to them, they found him. They identified that he had access, and they made an offer and he said yes. He looked at his coffee. He said he needed the money. I believe him. I also believe that believing him doesn't change anything." "What are you going to do?" "I've already done it. He has a severance package and a signed agreement, and he's no longer involved in any capacity." He looked up. "He'll live. He just won't live near anything I'm building." Selene nodded. "That's the right call." "I know." He said it without satisfaction. "He said to tell you he was sorry." "He doesn't have to be sorry to me." She picked up the coffee. "He wasn't working for me. He was working against you." "That's different," she said. "The sorry that matters is the one he has to find somewhere by himself." She drank the coffee. It was better than the one she'd let go cold. "Tell me the rest." "Everything," he told her. It took 40 minutes, and he did it the way he'd promised, without the careful omissions that had characterized the last 6 months, without the managed disclosures of a man parceling out information in quantities he'd decided were appropriate. He told her about the secondary connection to the entity holding the Caldwell shares, and about the specific nature of that connection, and about 2 other things she hadn't known that she received without expression, and filed in the part of her mind that was already recalibrating the map of what she was inside. When he finished, the office was quiet. Outside the window, the morning had arrived fully, gray and cold and clear, the kind of New York November morning that offered no comfort but had a particular austere honesty to it. "Why didn't you tell me all of this 6 months ago?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Because 6 months ago you were deciding whether to trust me, and the complete picture of what I am—" He paused. "It's a complicated picture. I didn't want to hand you the complicated picture before you'd had time to see the parts of it that were worth trusting." She looked at him. "That's still managing my information." "Yes. I don't want that." "I know." He met her eyes directly. "I'm telling you now." She held his gaze. She thought about the 6 months, the documents and the careful negotiations and the courthouse and her mother's kitchen table. She thought about, "Do you trust me on the steps in the cold air?" And what she'd said back, "Ask me again in a week." It had been 1 day. It had been approximately a year's worth of days compressed into one. "Okay," she said. He nodded once. "The shares," she said. "Bring them back." Already in motion. He turned the laptop toward her. "It'll complete by noon." She looked at the screen, the numbers, the structure of it, the 3 layers, the silent partner, the invisible architecture of a power that worked precisely because it didn't need to announce itself. She thought about Grayson in his executive conference room right now, watching the Chronicle piece circulate, watching the board go dark, watching the SEC make formal what had been informal. She thought about what he was feeling. She tried to be honest about it, not gloating, not satisfied, just honest. She knew what it was. She had felt the version of it available to someone without his resources. The specific sensation of watching the structure you'd built come apart, piece by piece, and not being able to stop it because the pieces were falling too fast and from too many directions. She didn't feel sorry for him. She didn't feel nothing either. She felt something she didn't have a clean word for. The weight of it, the cost of it, the years it had taken to get here, and what those years had taken from her and what she had made from what they'd taken. At 9 a.m., her phone showed a call from a number she recognized as Diane Foss. She answered. Ms. Ashford. Diane's voice was professional and careful and had in it something that was not quite defeat, but was in the vicinity of it. I'm calling to let you know that as of 30 minutes ago, I have withdrawn from Mr. Vale's representation. Selene said nothing. I want to be clear that this is a decision about the case's current trajectory and its implications for my practice, Diane said. I am not... A pause. A small, careful one. I wish you well with the remainder of the proceedings. Thank you, Diane, Selene said. A beat. He's going to make it difficult. Today. Even now. Maybe especially now. Another pause. He doesn't know how to stop performing, even when the audience is gone. I know, Selene said. Diane hung up. Selene put the phone down and looked at Nico. Foss withdrew. Nico looked up from the laptop. He's running out of structure. The structure was always the performance, she said. Take away the audience and there's nothing underneath it. She stood. We should go at 2:30. I want to be there before the board convenes. He looked at her. How are you? It was the question from the courthouse steps, the elevator, the car. How are you? She had answered it differently each time, and each answer had been true for that moment, and she thought about what was true for this moment, in this office, in this morning, with the Chronicle piece circulating and the shares coming back, and Diane Foss's careful goodbye still in the air. Tired, she said, and she stopped, found the word. Ready. He nodded. Like that was sufficient. Like that was in fact exactly right. They arrived at the Vale Innovations building at 2:58. It was a glass tower in the West 50s, 42 floors, the kind of building that was designed to make you feel the weight of the institution before you entered it. Selene had been in it twice during the marriage, once for a company event she hadn't wanted to attend, and had attended anyway, once to meet Grayson for lunch in the executive dining room on the 38th floor. Both times she had felt, in the particular way of a person who understood intuitively the relationship between architecture and power, that the building was designed to tell her something about where she ranked. She walked in without looking up at it. The lobby security recognized Nico, or recognized what Nico represented, which was essentially the same thing, and made the specific, efficient adjustments that happened in the presence of a certain kind of person. Petra was already inside, near the elevator bank, with Marcus and Carson, who had never met in person before today, and were doing the careful professional circling of two people who had been working the same problem from different angles and were now in the same room. Carson looked at Selene when she came in. He was smaller than she'd imagined. She'd only ever spoken to him by phone, and had the slight permanent squint of someone who spent most of his time looking at small type. He said, Philip Crane is in a car outside. He wanted to come. She thought about that. Tell him to stay in the car. He said you'd say that. He said to tell you he'd like to see the end of it. She thought about Philip Crane and the 6-year wait and what it meant to lay something down and then not see where it landed. Tell him to come in, she said. Keep him away from any cameras. Carson texted someone. Selene looked at Marcus. The board has been in session since 2, Marcus said. He had the look of a man operating on professional autopilot, which for Marcus was a kind of focused calm. 3 executive board members have already signed a motion for removal. They need a 4th to proceed. The 4th is undecided. He paused. Grayson is in the building. He's on the 38th floor. Is he coming down for the meeting? Unclear. He'll come down, she said. He always comes down. Staying up there and watching it happen without him is worse than what happens when he walks in. She was right. At 3:27, the elevator in the main lobby opened and Grayson Vale walked out. He had changed his suit since the morning. This one was darker, almost black, and he had the quality of a man who had spent the last 9 hours making decisions and absorbing information and was now in the specific mode that extreme pressure produced in him, which Selene recognized from 3 years of observation. The performance went quiet, and something rawer came through. The public version of Grayson was the rehearsed one. This version, the jaw set hard, the eyes moving fast over the lobby, finding her immediately. This was the version you got when the audience had stopped mattering because the stage was on fire. He walked directly to her. Nico's people shifted. Nico himself stood 2 feet to her left and did not move. Carson had stepped back. Marcus held his ground. Grayson stopped 3 feet from her. He looked at her the way he had looked at her across the courtroom 27 hours ago, except without the smile, without the performance, without any of the architecture he used to make himself the largest thing in a room. He said, "You destroyed it." His voice was low, not quiet, low, with force in it, the force of something that had been built up over the 9 hours since 6 a.m. and had not been able to discharge until this moment. "The company," she said. Not a question. 14 years. His jaw worked. 14 years? Grayson. She kept her voice even, not cold, even. "The company survived what you built it on for 14 years. What ended it was what you built it on, not what I did. You gave them the information. Philip Crane gave them the information. Philip Crane, who you put in a position where the cost of silence became higher than the cost of speaking." She looked at him directly. "You did that, not me." Something moved in his face. It was not the simple anger she'd expected. It was more complicated than that. There was something under the anger that she recognized because she had seen it in her own face in a different bathroom mirror at a different low point. And it was the specific grief of a person who understood, maybe for the first time without the buffer of their own story, what they had actually done. It was brief. A few seconds. Then the anger came back over it. "The settlement offer was real," he said. "You could have taken it. You could have been quiet," she said. "Could have signed the paper and taken the money and let you continue." She held his gaze. "I know. I considered it." She paused. "For about as long as it took me to remember what you put my mother's name next to." His jaw tightened. "That was the mistake," she said. Not with heat. With the precision of someone stating a fact they'd had time to examine. "You could have kept it about money, and I might have let it stay about money. When you went after her, you showed me what you were willing to do, and I stopped being able to accept a version of this that left you capable of doing it again to someone else." He stared at her. The lobby was very quiet. The security desk had gone carefully still. The few Vale Innovations employees who had been moving through the space had stopped moving. "You don't get to make that speech," he said. "You don't get to make this about principle. You came in with Varela and his—" He stopped. "You came in with people who are not clean, Selene. And you want to stand here and talk about what I was willing to do." She thought about this. She had thought about it before, specifically and honestly, and she had arrived at the same place each time. "Nico does things I don't always have full visibility into," she said. "I know that. I'm not going to pretend I'm standing entirely in the light." She looked at him steadily. "But what Nico has never done is fabricate records and put them next to an old woman's name in 3 publications. There are things I won't do. That's the line I know how to hold." She paused. "You never found yours." He looked at her for a long time. The lobby was still quiet. Somewhere above them, on a floor she couldn't see, a board was meeting and a company was being ended and restructured into whatever came after this. And outside the glass walls of the building, the city was doing its continuous and different business, processing this the way it processed everything, by absorbing it and moving on. "What happens now?" he said. It was not a threat. It was, she recognized it, and it surprised her briefly, the recognition, a genuine question. The question of a man who had spent 14 years in a structure that was now gone and did not know what the ground looked like under it. "The federal process," she said. "The board, the financial restructuring." She paused. "Lawyers. A long time of lawyers." He absorbed this. "And you?" "I'm going to go home," she said. "Tonight. For the first time in a long time, I'm going to go somewhere and stay there." He looked at her. Then he looked, briefly, at Nico, who had not moved, had not spoken, had simply been present through all of it in the specific way of a man who understood that this particular conversation was not his. Then Grayson looked back at Selene, and there was something in his face that was the closest thing to honest she had ever seen from him. It was not remorse, exactly. It was not apology. It was something more like recognition, the recognition of a person seeing another person clearly, possibly for the first time, after years of seeing only the role they'd assigned them. It came and went in a few seconds. Then he walked past her toward the elevator and did not look back, and the elevator came, and he got in it, and the doors closed, and he was gone. The lobby exhaled. Philip Crane was standing near the far wall. She had seen him come in when Grayson entered and had registered his presence the way you registered peripheral things when the central thing demanded attention. He was older than she'd imagined, mid-60s, heavy-set, with the look of a man who had been carrying weight for so long that the posture had become permanent. He was watching the closed elevator doors. His expression was not satisfaction. It was something simpler and harder to name. She thought about what he'd said to Rachel Thorne. "I'd like to sleep again." She thought about what that meant, not as a quote, but as a fact about a person. 6 years. The specific exhaustion of it. She walked over to him. He looked at her. His eyes were red at the edges in the way of someone who had cried recently and was not going to cry now. "Thank you," she said. He shook his head slightly. "Don't." He said it without unkindness. "I didn't do it for you. I did it because I couldn't do the other thing anymore." He looked at his hands. "I want to be clear about that. It wasn't courage." "I know," she said. "It still counts." He looked at her. Something in his face shifted. Not relief, not gratitude, just a small settling, like a thing that had been held at tension finally allowed to rest. He nodded once and looked back at the elevator doors, and she left him to whatever he needed to do with the moment. The board meeting formally removed Grayson Vail as CEO of Vail Innovations at 4:47 p.m. The vote was 5-1, the one being a board member who had been with the company since year 3 and who cast his dissenting vote with the expression of a man honoring an obligation he no longer believed in because the obligation was the only thing he had left to honor. The interim structure was put in place. The federal process, which Petra had been tracking through contacts, was formally confirmed by a brief public statement from the relevant agency at 5:30. Selene was not in the boardroom when any of this happened. She was in the lobby. Then she was outside on the sidewalk in the cold November air, and Nico was beside her, and the city was doing what it always did. "It's done," Marcus said, coming out behind them. He had his phone in one hand and the look of a man who had completed a very large amount of work and was uncertain yet whether to be satisfied or simply tired. He settled on something in between. "The asset division will proceed on the original terms, actually better than the original terms, given the Caldwell shares returning and the patent documentation." He paused. "It's going to take months to finalize everything, but the contested core—" "I know," she said. "Thank you, Marcus." He looked at her for a moment, then he said, "You should have told me about Nico earlier." "I know." 8 months. "I know. If we'd had that time to prepare—" "Marcus," she looked at him. "I know. I'll tell you things earlier from now on." He absorbed this. Then he nodded once, accepting it in the same practical way he'd accepted everything else, and went back inside to deal with the paperwork that a day like this generated, which was considerable. Selene and Nico stood on the sidewalk. The early dark was coming in. November dark, arriving before you were ready for it, turning the city into its lit nighttime version earlier each day. The glass tower behind them reflected the sky and the street and the people moving past without looking up. She said, "I want to go see my mother." "Tonight?" "Tomorrow." She looked at the street. "Tonight I want to—" She stopped, found what she actually wanted, which was not a strategy or a next step or a protective measure. "I want to go somewhere and not be in motion for a few hours." Nico was quiet for a moment. "I know a place," he said, "if you want company." She looked at him. The angular face in the city light, the weighted eyes that had been carrying something through all of this and were still carrying it and would carry it for a while yet because that was the nature of what he was. And she had decided she understood that and could live inside the understanding. She thought about 6 months of careful distance and the courthouse and her mother's kitchen table and the conference room and the car and this sidewalk. "Okay," she said. They walked. Not to a car, walking, which surprised her slightly and which she found, once they were moving, was exactly right. The city in the early dark of a November evening, the storefronts lit, and the people moving in the cold and the particular smell of it, exhaust and concrete and the faint ghost of something cooking somewhere. She had lived near this city for most of her life and had never found a clean word for what it did to her and still couldn't find one. It was not comfort. It was something more like company, the company of a thing that kept going regardless, that processed everything and was changed by none of it, that would be doing exactly this at this exact hour in every configuration of her life she could imagine. They walked 12 blocks without saying anything significant. He pointed out, once, a building she hadn't noticed, a narrow limestone thing wedged between two larger structures, with a fire escape that had old painted letters still visible on it from some previous business. She looked at it. She didn't know why he'd pointed it out, and she didn't ask, and it was enough that he had. He took her to a restaurant on a side street in the West 40s. Small, not expensive, the kind of place that had been there for many years and would be there for many more because it served food that was exactly what it was and didn't try to be anything else. They sat at a table near the window. They ordered. They ate. She said, partway through, "What do we do about Daniel?" "It's done," he said. "I told you." I mean, what do we do about the fact that someone found him and bought him, that the infrastructure had a person in it who could be bought? She looked at him. "That's not a Daniel problem. That's a structural problem." He looked at her for a moment. Then, "Yes. We need to look at everyone." "I know. Not because we don't trust them, because trust without verification is a debt you're running up," he said. "Yes." He held her gaze. "I've been thinking about that since last night. How to build something where the verification is the structure, not a supplement to the trust. That's going to take time. Things that work usually do." She ate for a moment. The food was good in the simple way he'd promised. Straightforward, warm. The kind of thing that met a need without calling attention to the meaning of it. She hadn't eaten properly since soup at her mother's table, and she hadn't realized how much she'd needed this until she was in the middle of it. "Carson," she said, "what about him?" "He should be paid properly, for everything. The 11 years, not just this last part." She looked at her food. "He carried that thread for 11 years. He did it because of his own reasons. I know that. It still deserves to be recognized. I'll talk to Petra." "I'll talk to Petra," she said. "He's been working for my interests. That's mine to settle." Nico looked at her. Something in his face that she was still learning to read, the register of a man who was recalibrating, adjusting to a version of things that was slightly different from what he'd planned, and finding the adjustment acceptable. "All right," he said. They finished eating. Outside the window, the street went on being the street. A couple walked past, arguing about something that resolved itself in laughter by the time they were out of sight. A delivery person on a bicycle went by with extraordinary speed. An old man walked a very old dog with enormous mutual patience. She watched all of it. "The foundation," she said when they were having coffee. "The one I was building. The one Grayson called fraudulent in court, which was both a lie and the most revealing thing he said all day." She looked at her cup. "I want to open it properly, not quietly. Officially, with the profile that today will bring, which I know I can't control but I can direct." She looked up. "Women coming out of marriages like mine, coming out of financial situations where someone else controlled the information and then used the information as a weapon." She paused. "It's a specific kind of damage, and there's a specific kind of rebuilding that it requires, and I've learned most of what I know about it the hard way." Nico looked at her for a moment. "You've been thinking about this for a while." "Since before I met you." She held the cup. "I couldn't do it while the divorce was active. Anything I built would have been characterized as fraudulent transfer, which is exactly what Grayson called it. Now," she paused, "now the characterization doesn't hold. What do you need?" She considered, not whether to answer, she'd already decided to answer, but how to frame it, where the line was between accepting help and ceding control of something that needed to be hers. She was still learning where that line was. She suspected she would be learning for a while. "I need it to be independent," she said, "financially and structurally, not connected to you or to the partnership in any way that allows someone to characterize it as, 'I understand,'" he said. "I can help with structure without being in the structure." "Yes." She looked at him. That's exactly what I'm asking. He nodded. The restaurant was thinning out around them. The after-work crowd had come and gone, and what was left was the quieter later evening version. The small groups and the solitary people with books, and the couples sitting in the comfortable silence of people who had run out of new things to say to each other and found that was all right. She looked at all of it, the ordinary texture of other people's evenings, going on around her, indifferent to what the last 30 hours had been. She thought about Grayson in the elevator, the look on his face before the doors closed, the brief, unguarded thing. Not remorse, she had been right about that, but something adjacent. Recognition. She thought about what he was doing right now, in whatever room, with whatever attorney remained willing, running whatever calculation was left to run. She thought about what it would look like for him, the months ahead, the federal process and the legal process, and the long, slow public accounting of a man whose story had been revised by facts he thought he'd buried. She did not feel triumphant. She had expected to at some point during the last 30 hours, and the feeling had not arrived. What had arrived was something quieter and more complicated. The particular exhaustion of someone who had fought a long fight and won it and found that winning it looked, from the inside, less like victory and more like the moment after a storm when you went outside and assessed what was still standing. A lot was still standing. "What are you thinking?" Nico said. She looked at him, the restaurant, the coffee, the window, the street, the November night doing its cold, clear business outside. "That it's strange," she said, "to have been moving towards something for this long and then to be on the other side of it." She looked at her hands around the coffee cup. "I spent so much time thinking about how to get through it that I didn't spend much time thinking about what through it looked like." "What does it look like?" She considered. She let herself actually look. At the room, at him, at the specific texture of this evening in this place, which was ordinary and was hers, and which tomorrow would be followed by another ordinary day that was also hers, and then another, and that those days would contain the foundation and the legal finalization and the ongoing complicated project of the partnership she was inside, and that all of those things would require work and navigation and the particular daily effort of building something that lasted. None of it was finished. None of it was going to be finished. That was, she understood now, what through it actually looked like. Not an ending, but a different kind of ongoing. One she had chosen, from a position of some actual ground under her feet. "Like something I can work with," she said. Nico looked at her. Something in his face. Not the weighted eyes, not the angular, careful control. Something underneath those things, briefer and less armored. "Yeah," he said. "Me too." They left the restaurant at 8:40. The street was cold and clear, the sky above the buildings the particular deep blue-black of a city night. They walked back toward the office to collect what needed collecting, and then she would go to the apartment Marcus had arranged during the proceedings. Her apartment, the one with her books and her clothes and the window she'd looked out of during the worst weeks, and sleep. Just before they turned the corner, she stopped and looked up. She didn't know what she was looking at specifically. The building line against the sky, the lit windows, dozens of them, hundreds, other people in other rooms at the end of other days. She looked at all of them and felt, in the looking, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not safe, not fixed, not finished, but present. Fully in the moment she was in, without the weight of the worst of it pressing her forward or backward. Just here, in this, in the cold November air with the city making its constant sound around her. Nico waited. He did not ask what she was looking at. He stood beside her and looked at whatever she was looking at and was simply there, which was, she had learned, what he was best at. Not the invisible architecture of influence, not the management of complicated structures, but this. Being present in a moment without trying to manage it. After a while, she lowered her eyes from the buildings. "Let's go," she said. They went. Behind them, the city held its 10,000 lit windows against the dark, and somewhere in it a man who had once believed in the permanence of his own power was learning what permanence actually required. And somewhere in it, a tired man who had carried a thing for 6 years was trying, for the first time in a long time, to sleep. And somewhere in it, an old woman in Hartford was turning off the television and going to bed with the particular piece of a woman whose daughter had come through something and was standing on the other side of it. Selene Ashford walked through the cold city and did not look back. The night was long and clear and entirely hers.